Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
For those of you who, well, I'll just share the story. I run AmSpirit Business Connections, and there are lots of people that help with it. And one of the people that has helped over the years is my wife, Linda. And Linda's great. Linda is way smarter than me. She's a whiz with Excel. She has set up our book. She's set up lots of stuff. And over the years, she's helped quite a bit. But then over the years, I've really tried to not minimize her involvement, but she works a corporate job. She's a VP of a Fortune 500 company, and she's very busy there. And so I didn't feel it was fair that she come in here on the weekends or whatnot. So I've really tried to take on more and more and systematize more and more. But the other problem with it is, I don't want to say we didn't get along, but our views on business were just different. I'm very planned out. I'm very measured. And it's not that she's not, it's just she has a different view on things. And I think part of it is just kind of the corporate sort of a thing. And, you know, in the entrepreneurial world, there's a lot of relationships. There's a lot of trying to get along. In the corporate world, there's a lot of, hey, if you don't fit in, you're done. And, you know, so there was some friction there. But at any rate, I just share that story as a lead in because today I have on Dr. Sean Dill and Dr. Lacey Book, and they are a power couple. They serve as a multidisciplinary consultants in the entrepreneurial space. They've been featured in Forbes magazine, an entrepreneur, and as I indicated, they're a power couple. And they explained, hey, we're married. I said, well, I figured that. They run Black Diamond Club, which is a group of 600 plus service professionals, with a desire to reach more people, make a bigger impact, and create the lifestyle they deserve. And their work is driven by relationship and collaboration, and they've in a number of different businesses. And their mission where health and success are known as fundamental truths. This is their mission, where health and success are known as fundamental truths rather than fundamental pursuits. So as we were planning this, there's a lot of directions we could have gone with all the different types of things that they do, but I was very intrigued by the fact that they've made it work. They're a power couple. You can't see this is audio, but they're smiling. And they're right next to each other. Maybe this is all a show, but you guys get along and you help other people get along. And I think that's, I don't want to say unique, but it's certainly special. So welcome to the program.
Thank you for having us. We're excited to be here.
Yes, thank you so much.
Together. We're excited to be here together.
All right.
We're married.
Yeah.
And we're married.
At least at the onset of the show.
Yeah, no, it's going to stay that way. No, I think this is a great conversation for us. It's a podcast about relationships, and I'm fond of saying relationships are relationships. And, just it's all trying to get along. You guys have made it work. I guess can you give us some history when it started? Were you married before you went into business or?
Yeah, no, we've been together for, I think, 12 years now. And kind of history of our story, when we got together, we didn't have this current business and this model. And people always like to hear our story because when we first got together, we didn't have 2 pennies to rub together. We had 2 kids living in a 625 square foot apartment, and didn't really even have enough money to buy them a mattress. Like we were just trying to make ends meet. And what was really good about us is we align in so many ways with our purpose and our passion. And so that we knew that we had something special, but those times aren't always easy. And so we started.
Yeah.
Never,
I'm really impressed. I mean, it's because money is a stressful thing, right?
Right. Yes.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah, I'm
No,
more
yeah, I
impressed.
mean, we could just talk about that the whole time if
Yeah.
you want. I'm sure there's a lot of listeners out there that relate to that. Money is stressful. And like you talked about, man, having a difference in business philosophy is really hard when you're working with your significant other, but having a difference in money philosophy is really hard when working with your significant other. And when we got together early on, we did not see eye to eye on that. We had
Mm,
different upbringings, we had different viewpoints on how money worked, abundance versus my scarcity mindset and lack. And we're just trying to like figure this thing out, and how do we grow? How do we scale? What do we do with the money we make? And for a long time, we were a little bit in disagreement because of our mentality and
mhm,
how we interacted in life previous to that. One of the big pivotal moments in our relationship and our business trajectory was actually somebody telling me that I was the barrier to our growth because of my lack mentality. I think in any relationship, that's one of the hardest things when you're working with somebody, whether it's a significant other or even a partner, is being able to recognize that you're the stopgap to growth.
mm.
And when I heard that, that was a moment for me that I knew I had to make a change and really begin to work on my mindset and my mentality so that we could do what we were telling each other we wanted to do. And that was probably the beginning of us saying, hey, man, if we can figure out this relationship, this can be the vehicle that drives the whole thing. Collaboration is great, partnerships are great, but if this isn't right, we're not going anywhere, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. Because my wife's involvement, one of the big things she helped me with, because Lacey, I think I don't want to say I'm like you, but I kind of have that scarcity mindset as well. And
Yep.
I won't do something. Well, I can make that, right? Well, you can go buy it at the store for $30. I know, but I can make it, Um, and and my wife she's not a spendthrift, don't get me wrong. I mean, she's frugal as well, but I would just make her pay the bills. I don't even want to see it,
Right.
because it would just stress me out. And I'm beyond that now. But early on, if I were to look at the bills, um, and I've had some big legal bills. We franchise, so
Sure.
it, so that was huge for me. I don't know what your stories are. Sean's
No,
there, smiling.
well, but Frank, that's impressive that you guys did that. I can't tell you how many couples that we've worked with on helping them work together in a relationship. But so oftentimes there's one person that's solely responsible for the money, for the bills, for the accounting. And a lot of times it's not the person that does the best with money or has the best money mindset. And
Yeah,
it causes so many issues. So the fact that you were able to recognize that early on and have her do that, like, kudos to you because we see the opposite quite often, right?
Well, and that's, yeah, one part of that though is a potentially deadly move that a lot of couples make, and that is the person that does not feel comfortable with the finances dishes it off on the other person. Now, thankfully, in your case, it
It
worked
worked
out.
out.
But sometimes the other person doesn't want to deal with it either. So
Right.
if thankfully your wife was able to, she had a mindset that allowed that. But if you're like, hey, we have these massive legal bills because we're building our business, and then you just push it on the partner, and she's writing these checks, like, what in the
yeah,
world is Frank doing over there, spending all of this money? That
It
can
caused a
really
lot of,
become very
yeah.
destructive. And so, conversations around money, conversations around our mindsets around money. And what's funny too is these two things actually, go hand in hand. Is, people don't realize that love is a learned concept, right? So we think it's just innate, but we learn how to love mostly from our parents. Like, our
mhm,
parents love us. Some people express love through physical touch. Other people, they were pat on the back and maybe their parents never hugged them. But we learn these concepts, but we also learn money, right? So our
mhm,
parents might have given us an allowance, quarter a day. Other people, they didn't have an allowance. They just spent whatever they wanted. Other people had no allowance because the parents didn't have money and because the parents would always make something. And so you pick this up and then you're like, well, I can make it. Why would we spend any money on it? And so we learn these concepts, and then we bring another person into the equation. And now these things might not mesh. It
Mhm.
happens with love. It happens with money. It happens with a lot of learned concepts that if we don't know how to reconcile them can ultimately be destructive.
Yeah. I had a marriage counselor on. Again, relationships are relationships. God gives us one brain. You know, it sees business, trust in business and trust in personal relationships the same. And so I brought a marriage counselor on, and he enlightened me to, in every relationship, there are 8 relationships. There's the relationship you two have. There's a relationship you have with yourself. And then there's the relationship that each of you have with your parents, right? Now, my father grew up in a Croatian neighborhood in Chicago, Depression era, right? You made things, you know, that's just, you know, that's where it came from, right? You know, we don't need to hire somebody, we can make it. Yeah, but you can go to the store and buy it for less. I know, but I can make it and save the cash. So I recognize that in myself. Now, my wife and I both have CPA, so we're both kind of numbers driven. And sometimes I'll spend money, and for our 10th anniversary, I bought her a really nice ring. You know, I didn't get a thank you. I got, how much did you spend on this? Right. Which is fine. We're 28 years in. It's all fine. But so she's cognizant of money, but whereas I choke on writing a check to pay a bill, she's like, it's got to be done. And I valued that. So, awesome.
Yeah, that's definitely one of our number one things that we have individuals do in any working relationship, is to be able to have communication points around money, how you think about money, what your risk tolerance with money is, and especially if you're in a relationship, where did that money mindset come from? Because it allows you to really begin to uncover what that deep rooted mindset is and be able to get to shift it so that you can meet and come into alignment and agreement on what are we doing with our money? How are we spending our money? Because if you can be in agreement and alignment with that, number one, it decreases those resistance points and that stress in the relationship.
Yeah.
But number two, it allows for you to really pursue the things that you set forth without argument, without strife. Right. And so that's probably we have like 2 major things that shifted our relationship. And that was number one.
Frank, I want to jump in.
Please. Yeah.
I might take your show in a whole other direction.
That's okay.
But one of the things too that, you know, we're talking about our relationship and our relationship with money. That is a really big one where you talked about there's 8 relationships. I would say there's
9.
Well, maybe even 16, because we have each of our individual relationships with money. But here's what people don't talk about. And this might be where your show goes off the rails. This not off the rails, but
I understand.
Not where you thought.
It's not live, Sean. It's not live.
You're gonna edit. You're gonna edit.
No, I won't edit. But
so here's the thing: is a relationship with money is like a relationship with another person, and I think that people also don't consider that. You know, with your wife, what would happen if you just completely disconnected from her? Let's say for a week, you were around her, but you never talked to her. You didn't acknowledge her. You didn't give her any praise. Well, eventually, if you did this long enough, your wife would be like, "What's going on, Frank? I'm going to leave." And people don't realize too that, you know, for us, we believe that money is just an energetic concept. We live this because, you know, the timing of when we're having this interview, the government was able to just print money from nothing. Literally, there was no money. Bang, there was money. And so money was created out of nothing. If the government could do that, well, so can every single listener, right? You can do this. But money, because it's an energetic concept, it wants to be in relationship with you. So one of the things we talk about is being very conscious of your money, having check-ins, knowing how much money you have. Do you know how many people in the United States, they actually don't even know how much money they have in their checking account? They just spend until the credit card or the debit card goes to zero, and then they wait for the next delivery, the next deposit. They get paid on the 1st and the 15th, and then they just start spending again, but there's zero connection. Well, of course, the money keeps leaving because you're not really in a long-lasting, deep relationship with your money. If you want to be in a relationship with somebody, you must spend time with them. You must communicate with them. You must
check in.
And all of these things apply to money as well. And so many people just want to, like, I don't want to know about it. Well, that's why it's a problem.
And that's, in fact, when people are in a scarcity mindset and don't feel like they have enough money, that's when they hide from it even more.
You check in less.
You check in less. Yeah.
Nobody wants to see your bank account at $4.58.
Right.
It's great when the bank account's super high. You could look at that all day long, but when
Yeah.
it's low, that's when you need to really pay attention to it.
No, I totally agree. And we are not rich, we are not poor, but we are, we talk about our money all the time.
Yeah.
Where are we at? And we don't necessarily agree on where we spend money, even in business. I want to spend money on this. And to a degree, she's okay with it, but she'll question, well, do we really need to be doing that? And sometimes she's, well, I think you should just go ahead and spend the money. No, I think this is a great conversation, to be perfectly honest. Lacey, you started to talk about the money was number one. What's number two? What's the other?
So I guess
point?
actually we have three.
Okay.
Another one came to mind, but number two, let me go to number two. I'm like,
All right.
wow, we have so many rules.
Yeah.
The second thing that we did that changed in our relationship is, I was working with a life coach at the time, and I remember I was going to see her, and I always say this because it puts it in perspective, but her name's Katya, and she's Russian, and she just tells you how it is, whether
Yeah.
you like it or not. Right.
Yeah.
And so I remember I went in one day and she said to me, Lacey, I got to tell you something and you're not going to like it. She looked me dead in the eye and she said, you're holding Sean back. So number one, I was holding back our business trajectory from a money mindset standpoint. And this is something completely different. She actually told me that I was holding him back. And I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, you're holding him back from doing what he's best at. And at that time, we had a chiropractic office, and I was trying to keep him in the office to work side by side with me because that's what I wanted.
Right.
And we were trying to build this healthcare franchise, this chiropractic franchise, but I was making him do the day-to-day work with me. And I was like, that's crazy. And I go home and I looked at him and I said, Katya said this really crazy thing to me today. She said, I'm holding you back. And he looked at me, then in my eyes, and he said, you are. And it was at that moment that number one, I told him starting tomorrow, he's not in the office. I took it over. But number two, that was a moment where we realized that we needed to have clearly defined roles. And I think in business relationships, whether it's your significant other or a partnership, roles are not clearly defined. And what we found is that people end up doing the work of one person as two people. And it's ineffective and inefficient because they haven't defined who does what. And so we sat down and we said, what are your responsibilities in the workplace? And I'm giving you that space to take care of that and trust you to do that. And here are mine. And then we took it a step further and we defined those roles in the household as well. So there was no questioning. There was no like, who's taking out the trash? Why didn't you do that? Who's responsible for this? And in that moment of number one, letting him do what he was best at, me do what I was best at, and then defining our roles and getting them so clearly defined, there was no question and there was pure trust that allowed us to go to a whole nother level in business and in our relationship.
I think that's a powerful concept for power couples like you, but just as you alluded to, just people in general. I've been involved in business with other people, and you almost feel like you need to be walking arm in arm doing things. Okay, this is a partnership, and you realize, oh, wait a minute here, your strength is not walking arm in arm with me in this moment. I'm the administrator. I'm really good at this. You get out there and sell. And I assume that was kind of, Sean, get out there and be the face of the practice. Was that really where it was headed?
It was actually the other way. Get out of the practice. I was in the practice.
Okay.
And that would allow me to go and build
on
the franchising side scale while she actually stayed in the practice. But yes, I mean, very the concept, absolutely 100%. But you said at the beginning that you and your wife saw things differently. And so that's that same concept. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that's the starting point, which you guys have absolutely figured out.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, they feel like in personal and in professional relationships that if we don't see and do everything exactly the same, AKA walking arm in arm on every single thing that we do, that it's not going to work. And I think an admission that the mere fact that you bring different skill sets, viewpoints, thought processes, philosophies, strategies, implementation models to the table is what makes the partnership, personal and professional, so strong. But it's when we cannot acknowledge that, when we think that, well, the solution here is for you to adopt my ideology, that's when it breaks down. If the solution is for us to figure out what your ideology is and my ideology is, and they're different, and then leverage strengths, that's great, because different doesn't mean wrong. It just means different.
Yeah. No, I get it. All right. 1 was money. 2 was responsibilities. What was 3?
3 is probably the one that most people go, ooh, at.
No, here's the question I have, Lacey. Did somebody tell you were at fault here too?
Yeah, that I was at fault. No.
Oh, at fault, but you're holding.
No, this one, I am not taking responsibility for this one.
All
This has
right.
actually been a core fundamental belief in our relationship for a very long time. This is the concept of no compromise. And so oftentimes people get into a relationship, and what we see happen is that there's always somebody in the relationship that's a little bit more vocal, a little bit more verbal. Their passion and their vision is big, and they have a tendency to just drive at that individual thing. And that means that somebody else in the relationship has to compromise what their passion is, what their desires are, what they want for their life, in order for that person to get what they desire. And so people end up compromising. And what we have seen is that oftentimes compromise can lead to a lot of issues in relationships. Somebody feels like they got slighted. They gave up more in their life so that you could have what you want. And so we have this concept of no compromise. And so what that means for us is that we, as individuals, we define what we want out of life, our lifestyle, where we would like to live, what kind of car we would have, what we want to pursue is our passions and our goals. And we do that as individuals. And then we come together, and instead of saying, well, okay, you want to live in Indiana and I want to live in Florida, we've got to figure out one. We say, how can we get both, but just have the timeline be off? How can we go after both for each other? And that's been really pivotal in our relationship, and to others that we teach that concept to, that you can have both things. There's not one person has to give up everything so the other person can have what they want. And so we really work hard on this idea of no compromise and trying our best to make sure that both individuals get what they desire.
Interesting. Sean, you want to chime in on that?
I think she summed it up well.
Okay.
See,
Okay.
most people are like,
Yeah, well, it's a different concept. A lot of people do have that reaction, like that's very interesting. But again, just from our job, we work with tons of service providers. So like I was mentioning earlier, where we've seen, somebody that wasn't comfortable with money just sort of dished it off onto someone else. At the same time, there are people that, 10 years later, that they're resentful because, remember that time that we invested all that money in Frank's business because he wanted to do the franchise,
and I didn't get to do my business.
I didn't do this, and it never comes back. And because of that, but people actually see that as very healthy. They're like, yeah, but we made a compromise. But the other person might not actually feel like it was an equitable event. Right. They do feel compromised, but even that's the problem. They feel compromised. Right. And so this is something that can carry over for a very long time if not addressed. And look, I think it's also for a lot of people. So like Lacey said, there's usually sort of a strong person in the relationship. The stronger person in the relationship probably is like, this sounds like the dumbest thing in the world. Why? Because they always get what they want typically. And there's other people who maybe have played more of a backup role in the relationship that are like, this is phenomenal. But if you would just do the work of sitting down and saying, let's just make a list of what you want. What do you want? And be very open and write what you want. I think that oftentimes too, one, as a couple, you can be surprised that there's a lot of things that you're in agreement on, which is also very nice to feel like, oh, I didn't know you actually wanted that. As a couple, it's also very interesting because there's things on there, like Lacey is incredibly successful, incredibly gifted in what she does, but she would like to go to culinary art school. Well, nobody would ever really guess that from your perspective. People that really know her, she's a vegetarian and wants to learn how to cook, and not just vegetables, but like that's her art, right? She loves that. So then the thing is, like, probably if we never engaged in this type of conversation, I would never know that.
Yeah.
she would be 60 years old and be like, you never let me go to culinary art school. And I'm like, what do you mean? What does that mean? I didn't stop you. But we never had the ability to say, you know what, I would love to do this. And then the next thing is, okay, well, that's interesting. How can we accomplish that? Right? Because we are a couple, because we are together, we are better. Because there are two of us, we can figure this out. Right? So what does that look like? And that begins that discussion. That also, by the way, then transfers into business relationships as well, like you were talking about, where, you know, that same thing occurs and probably is amplified even more, because where you said in the previous, segment, we were talking about walking arm in arm. Sometimes, and I've lived this myself, someone's like, hey, Frank, I feel like I'm doing all the work.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, but what I'm doing, it just doesn't take hours to do. And it has a monumental impact on our business.
Sure.
Are we doing time comparisons? Are we doing revenue comparisons? And that's where somebody needs to be able to say, yeah, but you know what would work for me is I would like to be able to have more time off, or whatever the thing is, so that we can communicate that and find a way to get both things done.
Yeah, no, I definitely see that. I've seen people who are in partnerships, non-married sort of things, unrelated. Somebody's really good at sales and really good at bringing the revenue in, which can happen in an instant, right? And the other person's kind of the administrator, which, you know what, it just takes a certain amount of time to do a tax return or to do the books or whatever. And the person doing the legwork, if you will, saying, you know what, geez, I see you doing all the vacationing and I'm here, whatever. Can we hire somebody to do the tax return? Because I'm sick of doing the tax return. And coming in agreement on something like that. This has been a great episode. Let's switch gears here. Share a little bit about Black Diamond Club, how people can get a hold of you.
We put together a very special offer for all of your listeners. It can be found at www.gethopetoday.com. GetHopeToday.com. We actually have, when you go to that page, we've loaded up a course that's called Relationships Matter. It's a full-on course. It's not a 30-second course. It's an in-depth course on relationships. And it's absolutely free. There's nothing to buy on the page, www.gethopetoday. That will plug you into our world, and no obligation to do anything beyond that. But I hope that people will consume that. I hope that you will find value there. And then, of course, if you want to engage us further, there's information on that page, how you can connect with us on social media, because relationships matter. One of the other things that we have super learned is, in our mentors, our business mentors and coaches as well, we began to notice that successful people are extremely accessible. And so, look, we want to model that. If we can answer any questions, please reach out to us. We are not here to sell anything. We're here to help. And so if we can be of any service or any help to anybody, reach out to us, however is best for you. Email, social media. We promise you we will get back to you, and we will help you to the degree that we possibly can.
Well, Sean, Lacey, thank you so much for your time today. This has been great.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today, and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.